welcome to Zon Canada. I'm your host, Jesse Betteridge. Joining me today is someone you haven't heard from in quite a long time. It is Karl Olson, the all but co-host of this show. Karl, how's it going?
Good for somebody who's been absent but also the co-host.
What have you been up to lately, Karl?
I've moved far from you. No, I live in Victoria now, or Victoria area, because I purchased a house. Because that's what you get to do.
Karl Olson, millennial homeowner.
Yeah, all I had to do was get a better job offer in tech. So I had to work in tech first. Then I had to get a better job offer than my current one. And then I had to use that to essentially give my current job the ultimatum of either I take this higher paying job or you pay me a little bit more, but then I get to work basically full remote. Like I go into the office maybe once every month to 6 weeks for like meetings. So that I can move somewhere where I can afford to actually own a home, because like I could not be a millennial homeowner in Vancouver. Like that's, I mean, I don't have that kind of generational wealth at my accessible to me, but I can make it happen out in Victoria. And so yeah, purchased a home. My wife, the illustrious nurse Hella, is very happy to have a area to garden. So yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the big advantages of having a home, is being able to grow your own shit.
It's also just like it's a good hobby. It's very fun. But it's something you can't. It's like, even if like, you know, people are like, well, you could have bought a condo in Vancouver. I'm like, no, not really. Like, I'd still be like way out in like Surrey or like Maple Ridge or something.
If anything, though, your options for anime conventions have gone on the downturn now.
I don't know, because on the other hand, I can take a boat to Seattle. That's much faster than me driving to Seattle. It's slightly more expensive.
Certainly faster than the Amtrak.
Yes. But on the other hand, you know, now we'll have to figure out some other way to watch animes at the same time, because Jesse was my watching animes buddy. Though I'm watching the P5, the Persona 5 anime with Nurse Sala, so that's good times. It's so clearly paced, like, oh yeah, we've got 2 cores, we don't have to rush this.
Well, at least some show out there is handling its 2-core structure confidently. Not Darling in the Franxx.
They get the Fireworks Factory.
Yes, there's a lot of talk about Fireworks Factories. Yeah, that actually might be a good thing to bring up a little later. This year we had quite an eventful April Fool's Day, or at least the events around April Fool's Day this year were pretty notable. I was at Sakura-Con that weekend. I will say that I had a lot of fun this year. Socially speaking, it was probably one of the best times I've ever had at the con. I mean, I've gone to that con for like 12 years now. And
that is insane.
I missed 1 year. 1 year I chose to go to Emerald City instead. I don't know what I was thinking. But yeah, it was a good time. I got to meet up with a number of Twitter people. Most notably, I finally got to meet Ian and Patrick, both of whom had been on this show before. Ian I've known for like 14 years. This is the first time I actually got to meet him, and that was definitely great. Hung out with those guys and some other Twitter people constantly throughout the weekend. We had a great time. I hope I can meet up with some of them again soon. I roomed with Jarvis Gray, who you might know on Twitter. He does some panels at Sakura-Con and other places as well. That was pretty good. He just loved showing off all of his expensive tech all the time. Like Jarvis, he likes to be super over prepared for his panels. He brings all this gadgetry so that he can be prepared for basically any situation that could occur, which is, you know, good thinking, because
I could imagine that after a certain point where you're just like, you know what, if I'm going to do panels on the regular, even if you can't directly write it off, you just have the justification of like, then my panel went well. Like like the reason you went to that con, you can't be like, con rooms weren't set up well. It's like, screw it. I'm squared up. I don't care.
But
I can see the value in that.
Here's the thing. He did run into a technical problem at the beginning of his When Anime Sells Out panel. And nothing that he had on him was able to resolve the issue, and the panel was delayed by about 10 minutes. And to be fair, the technical problem there was because the people who were using the room before messed around with all the the sound connections, and it just wasn't.
Yeah.
It didn't have it was a straightforward solution, but it took a long time to figure out. And that was unfortunate because that was a really good panel. It was basically showing a bunch of footage of anime characters hawking products. It took a bunch of ads of things like Lupin the Third and Fist of the North Star, and in Western ads for like the Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon Ford ads.
Oh man,
and stuff. It was a stellar panel. If you ever see him doing it at a different con, I highly recommend checking that one out. He also did one explaining obscure cultural references in anime as well. It touched on a lot of things I hadn't thought about before. There were some other good fan panels going on at the convention that weekend as well. Steve Jones from ANN, he goes by Vestinet on Twitter. He did a panel called Twin Peaks is Anime, kind of exploring the influence that David Lynch has had on anime, especially in the 90s. It was really interesting. He drew some really interesting parallels that I hadn't thought about before between both the old and new Twin Peaks and various anime that that you can draw very clear connections to. One interesting parallel that he drew was between Twin Peaks: The Return and Evangelion 3.33, and how those played on audience expectations and toyed with nostalgia and issues like that in really interesting ways that were kind of polarizing.
I really hope that if 4.44 is ever made, we get to see Shinji's forgotten that he's Shinji for 90% of the movie. He thinks he's Dougie Jones. This is Shinji's copy.
That would be, that would be pretty amazing. I'm just hoping that we could get. I'd be happy if we just got an announcement of the last film sometime.
It would be really cool if we ever knew that was going to happen, because it is definitely the kind of thing where I knew this, that it was never going to hold to the schedule that it was originally announced to. Oh, we're going to do these films with this kind of regularity. It's no, you're not. You're Hideaki Anno. Come on. Again, Fireworks Factory. I want to see this. I want to see where he's taken the audience expectations. I want to see his episodes 17 and 18 of Twin Peaks season 3 in the Evangelion context. Cause I think that's actually that could be very well the kind of thing that he ends up going for. It could be then it's suddenly cuts to Shinji's actual voice actor in in Hideaki Anno's hometown or something really weird and screwy like that. But it's I want it at this point. It's just knock it out. Part of the reason why Eva spawns so many, response anime. And I think it's imitators. I'm no, they're responses. It's other animators saying you thought this? Well, I'm going to take 13 or 26 episodes to say something in the same style, but not. At least the best of those clones do that. It's part of why there are expectations on Franks, is because there's a real hope that's these are people who are adjacent to that Gynax universe. They should have something constructive to say about the Eva style of robots. And so far you're just kind of come on. And then the few threads we're getting are are you just gonna redo Eureka 7? Was this the bait and switch? It's you thought it was gonna be an Eva clone, but it's actually Eureka. Psych.
See, with the thing about a bait and switch is that you can only go so long with the bait before the switch completely has no effect whatsoever. I think that's another thing about Darling in the Franxx, is that the staff on that show, I think they know that they can get away with just dragging this out until the last 3 or 4 episodes to finally say something, and that what they say doesn't necessarily have to be what anybody wanted. Yeah. That panel was good though. I'm glad someone finally took that kind of angle and did it as a panel. It was a good idea. Even though Steve does claim that he submitted it while he was drunk. But you know what? If that's what it takes.
Sometimes you just gotta you gotta have the guts to take the shots that are weird, and sometimes that doesn't come naturally.
So I also did 2 panels myself at the convention, both of which were constantly rescheduled right up to the very last minute. The last time I actually was not even informed that it was rescheduled. They both had fairly good turnouts despite that. They were Canada Anime Bizarro Wonderland, which I did on the Friday night. And then I did Your Name starring Keanu Reeves on Saturday. They both went pretty well. I was working on them till the final stretch pretty much. Canada Anime Bazaar Wonderland, it's kind of an evolution of panels I've done before. I'm just taking all the, Canada stuff I usually talk about, but just gearing it towards Americans who don't really know anything about that, and are just kind of, enamored by this idea of Canada being just this slightly weird alternate universe compared to the United States.
This ersatz America.
Yeah. And it went over pretty well. And, Your Name starring Keanu Reeves is, of course, comparing Your Name to The Lake House.
That's gonna guarantee that's got an audience. People just gotta see, how that's gonna play out.
See, the funny thing is, at the beginning of the panel, I think a lot of people didn't actually know what it was about, despite the fact that, it was in the panel description. That was for the best, because that's certainly a panel name that's gonna generate a lot of interest. And I actually kind of regret putting, even mentioning The Lake House in the description, because, a lot of people don't seem to remember that movie.
I think the problem is anybody who's gonna be in the anime con demographic who isn't also they're not just Andy Twitter, they're film Twitter. Those guys will remember, but for the general, I'm just a young anime fan, I'm going to a con, it's all they know Keanu Reeves because of movies, but they're not necessarily gonna know the Keanu Reeves romantic time travel thing that was kind of niche and somewhat oddly received at the time. That wasn't what the kind of media they were watching at that age. They're too.
But even people our age, who, and I mean, admittedly,
yeah.
I think at the time that Lake House was targeted at basically women in their 30s, so a little older than us.
Still,
but...
that's still gonna miss a lot of because here's the other thing: even anime fans in their 30s are basically regular people in their 20s a lot of the time, in terms of their media tastes. And that's not a knock; it's just what it is.
I'm still surprised by the number of older people who didn't just had no clue that this movie existed. I was a little nervous before doing the panel as well because it's a pretty elaborate panel in the way I contrasted analysis of Your Name with really bad clips from The Lake House, because it was a really bad movie with some really hilarious scenes in it.
Yeah, that's why also why people don't remember it. It wasn't a great film.
It's a terrible movie, and it was really complicated to put together. And I didn't know how each scene was going to land with the audience, and some things that I thought were going to be big hits didn't get a huge rise, but some things I wasn't expecting the audience to laugh at. People just went nuts over.
It sets you up better for the next time you do it.
Exactly.
Somewhere else, because now you know what people care about.
I know what to play up, even though, audiences can always be different when you're at different areas and different conventions. It was interesting when I started the panel, I mentioned that, in this panel, I'm going to basically spoil key points of Your Name. So if you haven't seen Your Name, please leave. And a lot of people apparently just came for Keanu because, a lot took off when I gave that spoiler warning at the beginning. Which I thought was kind of funny. But yeah, despite all the constant reschedulings, the panels had a good turnout and went pretty well. Regarding those reschedulings, a number of panels were actually canceled. I think on the first day, something like a dozen panels were just removed from the schedule. Organizationally, Sakura-Con was a bit of a mess. Well, it was a bit of a mess this year.
Sounds like that.
Yeah. I mean, most of the stuff that I was going to wasn't really effective, and I have finally learned when you go to a convention, just stick with the guidebook app. Don't ever go by what's printed anymore, because it's never reliable.
But now that they don't have to worry about now that they have that as an option, I think there used to be a pressure on cons to hone that in, try and keep that locked in, because it's how are we going to tell everybody? Now it's everyone's connected. Lane. You're good.
And I will say, not just organizationally, but also over the last, 11 or 12 years that I've been to this convention, I have to say that this was by far probably the worst year for guests in industry, aside from things like, the industry panels. There were some voice actors from Japan and a few creative people, but most of the primary focus was on the guests who were involved with the Fate Grand Order mobile game, which I guess that's a big deal if you're one of those people who likes to gamble but not really gamble on the gacha stuff. I mean, obviously that was a big deal for a lot of people, and I know I'm a bit of a hypocrite by saying this, but that's not really what I want to see from anime production stuff because that's not anime production. That's something tangentially related to anime. I know it sounds a bit hypocritical because last year, of course, their big focus was on Thunderbolt Fantasy, which is not anime but puppets or anime or puppets written by anime writers. And I thought that was cool. Maybe I'm just biased in that regard.
I think it's tough because it's just there's not really a place necessarily for that kind of heavily Japanese gaming. I think at like American gaming conventions, like I don't think they would get much focus at PAX if you were to bring those people over for that. But it's also just sort of like it would be useful to have that as I
remember the one time I went to Anime Expo, Atlas had a massive booth at Anime Expo versus when they're at PAX when they just had a tiny little stand kind of tucked away in the corner that nobody could see. I mean, they know their audience for sure. And there's,
exactly
not a lot of overlap there.
I mean, it's weird. I mean, there is, but there isn't. And it's the kind of thing whereas it's going to be center stage at an anime con, or sharing, depending on what kind of other guests you're getting in, sharing it with equals. It's like when you're, Atlas, and you're like, P5 is this great game, it's very successful, but you're not Far Cry 5. You're just not in that same league of like just bazillions of dollars being thrown at it.
So yeah, I mean, there was the Fate Grand Order stuff. They did bring in 2 animation directors, this time Mamoru Yokota and Shigefumi Shingaki. I went to one of their sort of, live sketch panels. I mean, those are always fun. There's a base level enjoyment that you're always going to get from that. At the panel we got to see, I think it was, Yokota, drawing Nami and Chopper from One Piece, and it was kind of funny because as he drew Nami, her boobs kept getting bigger, like as the drawing progressed.
Tracing over this. Let me fix this.
Yeah,
tracing over it again.
That's actually more or less what was happening. It was funny to watch for sure, and I think both of those guys.
That's how it happened in One Piece.
They both worked at Toei, and they didn't have the most interesting stories, at least compared to a lot of other creators. But it was still, those are always, seeing anime creators actually draw live is one of the most enjoyable things you can see. But
again, that also feels like another thing that's been kind of like subverted by online. It's like I can follow Moyoko Ano on Instagram and see her draw live. Like at random times, which is amazing. That's super cool. This like incredibly tight loop. But then it's like, again, what is the role of the convention in modern fandom? Because it's like if part of that's trying to bring you closer to the creators, it's like I can like hit a button and see that was seen by that that creator. Again, it's crazy.
This is coming back to me being a hypocrite in the way I criticize things about conventions. But it really. I guess I've gotten a stronger sense than ever that the social aspect of a convention is more important than, the actual industry aspect a lot of the time, which is a sentiment I have fought against for many years. But, I guess inertia is just kind of moving things in that direction now more than ever. One guest that I did regretfully kind of miss out on was Ian Sinclair. He was at the con. He's, of course, the voice of Space Dandy. And both of his panels conflicted with other stuff going on, so I couldn't make it. I do kind of regret not just like popping into his autograph and saying hi, or just getting him to sign my book or something, because he seems like a really great larger than life personality. I think it would have been fun just to bask in his presence for a little bit.
I've heard he's a dandy guy.
Yeah. I just love those Adult Swim Space Dandy ads that they did back when they were advertising the DVDs. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about the con. It was good. I'll go again, of course. Obviously, like even at its worst guest turnout, the Sakura-Con is still head and shoulders above pretty much any Canadian convention when it comes to industry stuff, especially something like Anime Revolution. But it's all relative, of course. But yeah, that was one thing on this magical April Fool's Day weekend. Another thing was one long-awaited premiere that took place, Reboot: The Guardian Code. Another thing that happened over the April long weekend. It was specifically the release of the first 10 episodes of that series. on Netflix in every country except Canada. Canada, the country where the series is being produced, will of course be receiving the series as a weekly broadcast on YTV starting in June, which is like the worst way you can make one of these broadcasts domestically stream internationally deals. Not that I think people should be, writhing in anticipation to see it anyway. Just in case you're not aware of this series, Reboot the Guardian Code is the end result of a long and tortured journey in various entities that are all kind of the same entity trying to continue Reboot. It is produced by a company called Mainframe Entertainment. Oh, wow.
This podcast is cursed.
Yeah. It's produced by a company called Mainframe Entertainment, which is really just a subsidiary spin-off of Rainmaker Entertainment, who bought out Mainframe long ago, and it's not the original Mainframe that made the series. There are a few names attached to it that were involved, especially in the early episodes of Reboot, but that clearly didn't have any effect on this show whatsoever. The original creators were not involved with this at all, and at least one of them, Gavin Blair, who's the most prominent sort of co-creator of Reboot. He has a large presence online and interacts with the fans a lot. He has actually actively disavowed it online, and he did so in he's been doing so in a much more hostile fashion than I really expected from him. And I
think it's also protective, though.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because otherwise people are gonna be like, well, what about this in the new show? It's like, it's not me.
Yeah.
Like you gotta ignore that stuff up front.
Yeah. No one, I think, who actually watches this thing, or even have just seen the trailer from this thing, I don't think they would think for a second that any of the original creators were involved with it. And for that reason alone, even if, I could think of anything overly positive or potentially positive to say about the series, it would be moot. It's irrelevant. They have a story they wanted to tell. They have been denied the ability to tell that story for many years now, and to have it continue without them is just it's pretty insulting, really.
Well, also it's like, from what I have heard, it has nothing really to do with what had come before. So it's not even like there was no reason to use this IP other than nostalgia to tell the story. They could have made an entirely new thing up with the same actual plots, and it would have been fine. You could have sold that direct to Netflix, except Netflix wouldn't have had a nostalgia IP to hawk it with. It's ridiculous in that sense.
So how this thing kind of came about in the form that it did doesn't really make any sense, because like you said, it has no real discernible connection to the original Reboot. And it also doesn't really have anything of actual nostalgia value in it, except for the final episode of this set, episode 10. I'll get to that one in a sec, because it's kind of its own subject. Now I did have a chance to watch it over the weekend because I was in the States on Netflix, but because I didn't want to spoil the good time I was having, I chose not to, and I just pirated it when I got home. And after watching it,
you could have used a VPN.
You know what? I'm not going to say this very often, but if you are going to watch this series, I think that you should pirate it. Just the very nature of this production, I don't think that it should be supported. You have to understand that we are, living in an age where hate watching is a form of validation. When
it's true. It's true. Hate watching is the clickbait headline of television.
Exactly. And I know that we all inexplicably love Neo Yokio, but the fact that it's getting renewed for a second season should be a warning sign for, watching things just because you hate them.
At least it isn't like they're making more Handshakers.
Handshakers is getting a dub in a home video release, though. So
that's out. The screener came across the desk at Toon Zone recently, and I'm like, do I want to ask for that and go through the hassle of getting that to me, because it's like $10 to ship it from the States and all this, just to hate watch it and just to trash it. And I'm like, I can't ethically justify that.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons. And the reason is just like hate watching Guardian Code legally will get you more Guardian Code right quick. And like worse, they'll be like, oh, you don't like it? We'll be as controversial as possible until you stop watching. At which point then we'll be canceled. Yeah, no, it is literally the like, it's the bad editorial in the New York Times and the Atlantic that's like, being soft on the alt-right. Like they wrote that because they knew that you'd share it and they'd get ad dollars and it would pay for other journalism that they maybe couldn't afford that you won't share, even if it's great. It really is, it's a problem. And I do worry that, just the fact that was released the way it was is maybe, I wonder to what extent internally that's now a thought on television production, for online streaming or otherwise, because it's certainly there in writing.
Our media dystopia is here.
Yeah. There's certainly the, like, I'm going to make a bad hot take because people will then be like, look at this bad hot take that I've shared with my 25,000, 2 million followers. Like, it's ridiculous. And that's like, so please don't be the person sharing the dumb article that's intentionally bad. Don't be the person watching the Guardian Code.
Yeah, I did watch all 10 episodes. If you're not familiar with it, it follows basically the same kind of idea as Zix or Code Lyoko. I want to say that it's actually closer to Lawnmower Man. Admittedly, that's a bit hyperbolic because Lawnmower Man is wonderfully bad. This is just painfully mediocre.
Yeah.
It's about these kids who go to Alan Turing High, the most advanced technical school in unspecified West Coast city.
Hasn't Alan Turing been through enough?
Yeah, exactly, right?
What kind of disrespect can you pile on a dead man? I guess that's what it is.
It wasn't enough that they cast Benedict Cumberbatch as Alan Turing. Now this, man. Main character, what's his name? Austin. He and these 4 other randoms, they play this video game. They discover that the video game was developed by Austin's father as a way of gathering them together so that they could...
So it's also Tron.
Yeah, it even has a character who's like, kind of like Olivia Wilde's character in Tron Legacy. She's, basically an AI that gets pulled into the real world.
Which is also a Code Lyoko thing, I think, as well.
Probably. I never watched Code Lyoko.
Bits and pieces. It's really hard to watch because it's like that. It's like peak French wannabe anime, and it's like I really appreciate their passion for the art, but it's just not an aesthetic for me.
But anyway, yeah, the kids, they go into digital land and fight boring looking enemies. Because this guy who hangs out in a warehouse and wears a hood over his face and calls himself the Sorcerer, notes that it's spelled Sourcerer, Sorcerer.
Oh wow. That's some like bad nerdcore rap joke. I can say that.
Yeah, he has some ambiguous hacking plans are afoot with him. One thing he does in episode 2 is the only discernible link to the original Reboot series is that he recovers Megabyte from an old system and basically turns him into his servant, and Megabyte seems more than happy to play this role, which is a complete departure from the actual character from the original, and also gives him a really lame redesign. The plot of each episode is lifeless, and somehow just each episode just feels like it's completely wasted its running time, failing to do anything interesting or unique, either in an overarching story or in individual stories.
But enough about Darling in the Franxx. No, just kidding.
As we mentioned, it lacks any element that even remotely resembles the original Reboot, like pop culture references or computer puns or jokes.
And
no matter how lame.
It's a shame because you could go so deep with that these days. Like an evil plan could involve like cryptocurrency and otaku coin or something. Like there's so much fucking meat on those bones these days.
My dream of seeing a Reboot episode based around a dating sim has just been squashed forever because there's no way that the writers behind this show would even have the inspiration to do something like that.
Like, even is it like, I mean, that's the thing is like, there's countless asides that would be very much from the original spirit of the show that it sounds like they missed. Like, cause I mean, that's the whole thing is that you don't have to, like, that shit doesn't even have to be center focus. Like, they didn't like lean on that. It's just that was part of the ambience And it's so easy these days. You don't even have to worry about are people are going to get it. Everybody's going to get it. And the fact that if they don't, there's going to be like 20 people on Twitter being like, did you notice in the background there was a cryptocurrency logo? Did you notice they were, like they named a character ICO? It's very funny. There's like, you don't, that stuff is just, honestly, if it was there as window dressing, would probably do a lot for it. And it's so easy to do that window dressing these days if you have like one technically inclined person involved.
Anything to even make the series stand out on its own merits, whether through just humor or the premise, it just feels very thoroughly suppressed. Like, I know that there's no way that all the people on this show so uninspired and incompetent to produce something this bad. There's some kind of active suppression going on here. People are pointing fingers at the show's producer, Michael Hefferon, who actually he is listed as the creator in the opening credits of the new series.
Wow.
To this day, I do not understand what that guy's end game is, because he claims to have appreciation for the original reboot. That does not show in the final product. He doesn't seem to have any desire to make anything new, because that definitely doesn't come through the final product. Yeah, it's just a confusing mess. I will say that for all its flaws, the show at the very least doesn't seem to have any terrible acting. All of the actors are, I don't want to say that they're not necessarily good, but they certainly do the best that they can with this material they're given. I mentioned like infantilized AI girl Vera in this show. She actually in some cases borders on being actually kind of funny. She's just on the cusp of maybe being a standout aspect of the show. Some people I know will strongly disagree with me on that, but I think that her actress actually really tried to make it work. But again, it's just not enough to really bring this show to where it wants to be. But the characters are just bland. I didn't go over the characters yet. There's Austin, who's our, main white guy. Tamara, who is, the, sarcastic vlogger who, actually I can't even think of anything else to say about her character. There's really nothing. I don't think she even had an episode that really focused on her. She has this weird stalker girl who's obsessed with her show, but so far it hasn't gone anywhere with that, and I'm not expecting it to in the later episodes either. There's one character, Parker. I think he's supposed to be on the autistic spectrum, but like most of the things that could potentially make the series stand out, they refuse to commit to it. It just feels completely suppressed. Also, he has this completely unsubtle crush on Vera, the AI girl, and it's just painful to watch. The second the slightest hint of it comes up, you're just like, oh no, they're actually gonna play this out, aren't they? And then there's Trey, who is the black athlete, of course. Yeah, it's uninspired cast, uninspired everything. In fact, the worst actors, the worst acting in the series, I would actually say, are from the original characters that they bring back in episode 10. They all kind of phone it in, except for Shirley Milner, who, does her damnedest as hexadecimal, but it's still not enough. Yeah, but here's the thing. Reboot, of course, had, even in its earliest, roughest episodes, it always had really effective world building. Only one episode of this new series even comes close to having any world building at all. It's the one where we're introduced to like AI digital assistants who are being hijacked. So like, this series version of like Alexa or Siri. They're sort of depicted as characters that exist in the digital world that communicate with humans. There was a lot of potential there that, could have shown how the world we saw in the old Reboot evolved into sort of the AI interface that we associate with computers today. But even in the episode that touched on that, you could tell there's just no interest or motivation in going in that direction at all. Honestly, I think that the approach this series takes, the very premise behind it, not only could have been good, but it actually, if it had been done well, it could have been the best way to revive Reboot, by just sort of re-envisioning it as something where people in the real world interface or interact with the digital world, because that's a much better analogy for how we interact with technology today. The original Reboot was set in a 1994 computer, and I personally don't believe that you can just resume things from the way it ended at season 4. I don't think there's any way you can do that modern audiences are going to really care about, apart from like the most hardcore fans of the original series. I think trying to explore what the real reboot world would be like today, and then working backwards is a better way of doing it. And I mean, even using like the live action footage and, you know, going back and forth with the 3D world could have been a good way of doing it. Reboot the Guardian Code could have been a fine isekai if they had gone that route, but they obviously did not want to go that route, because having more live action footage in each episode is, of course, much cheaper.
Yes. It's considered like the opposite of Ready Player One, where it's like Spielberg got to direct 11 minutes of live action footage, and then the rest of it just happened on a computer and he didn't have to care.
Exactly. Yeah. That's one thing that was frustrating to me, was that I thought, wow, this, you know, I actually kind of think this could have been the way to do it if the people behind it had been competent. I don't know what the original creators would think of that, of course, which is the most important thing at the end of the day, but that was just kind of my takeaway from that. Any bit of goodwill that you could find in those first 9 episodes are completely wiped away in episode 10, which is the one where they, you know, uncover the original mainframe and meet some of the characters from the original series. It's difficult to explain how awful this episode is. I actually kind of recommend watching episode 10, just to see how shockingly miscalculated it is in just about every way. I can't tell if it is trying to connect it to the original series, if it's trying to appeal to nostalgia, if it's trying to make fun of fans of the original series. It kind of seems to be trying to do all those things and failing to do all those things, because it just makes no sense at all. They find what is purported to be the original mainframe, and they travel inside of it and meet the original cast, played by the original actors for the most part as well. You know, their badly modeled mainframe looks worse than it did at any point in the original series. I'd say even including the first couple of seasons, where obviously the standards for what looks good were very different. It's just like a barren setting with no effort put into it. The characters are completely awful looking. The models are just really bad. They spout out catchphrases in really awkward and unnatural ways, that feels like it is supposed to be appealing to the audience, but it really isn't. So if it was supposed to be a nostalgic throwback, it just falls completely flat. If it's supposed to be a continuation, it makes no sense, because everything seems to be roughly at season 1. Again, no effort to really connect it to the end of the old series. And if it is just going with that season 1 status quo, I don't understand what they were going for in any way. And then you have the really bizarre element where a person who is apparently supposed to be the user from the original series discovers that mainframe was reconnected remotely, and then he somehow remotely connects to it and plays a game on the series. And the funny thing about the user is that he's not just the user, he's also like a hardcore Reboot fan who has all this Reboot paraphernalia in his home.
What the fuck? Why?
Yeah, I don't know. It's astounding. It makes no sense at all. Yeah, I don't know. Watch episode 10 yourself and just let it sink in how much of a disaster.
So also the user was comic book guy the whole time.
Yeah, like, what? Okay, what? I mean, yeah, I don't know. I'm at a loss for words on that one.
Oh my lord. This sounds painful.
The series isn't painful. The series, I didn't have a difficult time getting through it. I found it watchable. It's just really bland and uninspired and boring. And not at all really worth anyone's time.
And that's like the worst thing these days.
Is,
like there's been a lot of like reboots or not. Reboots may be the wrong term. There's been a lot of revivals recently, or things that are de facto revivals, and they're polarizing. But they're at least that gives them something. It's like Star Trek Discovery is polarizing. Orville, which is, let's be real, sort of like Seth MacFarlane's Star Trek fanfiction, is polarizing. Yeah. But there's something to it. Like, they're not boring. You can tear into them. You can tear into them from angles. The Star Wars stuff is usually at its worst. The new stuff is usually at its worst when it's boring. The stuff that's polarizing is at least like, people are like, I didn't expect this. It's like, good. That was at least something. A thing happened. The thing that, and it's certainly when going back to Evangelion, the new movies are nothing if not, particularly 3-3, it's all like, wow, it's completely went off the rails. Great. We don't know what that means. We may never know what that means, but at least that was something that we just didn't get. Oh, this was a clip movie. Great. The worst thing you can be is boring. And if this is kind of like, washes over you until it's at least actively antagonistically weird, that's trash. That's actually more trash than if it were like trashy, which is crazy, but it's true.
I mean, most of the successful revivals we've seen have been handled by their original creators as well. There have been successful ones without the original creators involved, but I think Reboot has to be the only one I have seen recently, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the only one where the original creators are actively opposed to what has been created.
We can, Lucas kind of moaned about the new Star Wars, but I mean, he's not like his taste is kind of like out the door at this point, anyways.
Also, Lucas willingly sold Star Wars to Disney as well.
You made like $50 billion.
That's condoning it as far as I'm concerned. Unlike the creators of Reboot, who basically were not offered what they asked, and have never been able to have the chance to actually continue the series on their own terms. With Lucas, it's not being continued the way he wants it to, but it's certainly on his terms because he willingly sold to Disney. So that's the big distinction there for me.
True. And it's also like that's a film and television question, I think, as well, as opposed to like, media that's run so long that like it's had 1 trillion creators anyways. It's all like, DCAU, MC, Marvel, Cinematic Universe, whatever. It's like those kind of things that are based off these like forever running comic book things are maybe a different issue in terms of rebooting and reworking and constantly, whether people like that is kind of moot because there was already like 30 billion people involved in it.
Comic books are just IP mines basically. And then the derivative works also feed into those IP mines. Marvel and DC are really unique in that sense.
Yeah, I really can't think of any other form of media that's quite like that. I mean, I think they're gradually turning things into that, but Reboot's not something to try and turn into like your franchise IP mine. Or it seems like you'd have to like let the creators do everything they want with it, and then like 30 years pass, and then whatever. Like when you're doing that with Star Wars and Star Trek, those feel like a bit more natural because effectively the original creatives in it and even the successor creatives in it are like long since out of the thing, and it's so woven into the pop culture thing. It's like comic books at this point in that sense. And also they were still sort of much more group creative works than in retrospect than Reboot was. Like a lot of the best parts of Star Trek weren't Lucas. Or Star Wars weren't Lucas. I'm going to piss off some nerds with this. I say this as a nerd. A lot of what made Star Wars work wasn't Lucas. It was other directors. A lot of what made Star Trek work was not Roddenberry at all. It was like hired gun sci-fi writers, and directors, completely throwing out the window so much of what he wanted. So again, those are kind of, if people who were originally attached are like, I don't like where they took this. It's like, you don't get to care. You were a drop in the bucket. Whereas I think you can't say that for Reboot.
Yeah. What I'm still hoping will happen is that this whole thing just fails miserably. Rainmaker will sell the rights to Reboot to someone who actually gives enough of a shit to pay the original creators what they want to continue it the way they want. I don't know if the mere existence of the Guardian Code or the large amount of publicity it's generated will make that more difficult. But I guess I'm just hoping for like a Dragon Ball Evolution kind of situation where the attempt to create something new is so bad that everything just kind of works in the favor of the original creators again and gets us a Dragon Ball Super. But we'll see what happens.
Reboot Super. Reboot overclocked. See, I got the branding unlocked.
It is funny. There's still a lot of people online as well who are holding out hope that Reboot the Guardian Code simply has not reached the fireworks factory yet. But like I kind of alluded to before, you can only bait the audience so much before the switch is effective at all.
It is a tough thing to kind of have these. I feel like that's another thing that's very tough for any of these things that are either in the spiritual vein of something else or is a direct reboot. It's very hard to sort of balance like satisfying new fans, satisfying old fans, over jamming too much stuff in, not having enough stuff in there. It's like balancing like getting to the fireworks factory versus being like, it's a nonstop fireworks show, and just there's a real art and finesse to this that I think we're only beginning to see because we get to see so many reboots. We get to see so many things that are being like revived now that we can start to be like nitpick like approach and get an understanding of what will tend to work and what will tend to fail in these reimaginings of things. And in that, it's really, it becomes apparent that some of these things just didn't get what the original was about, and they don't even know where to put the fireworks factory, I guess is where I'm getting at. Like, so many things, it's like they have no idea where you want to have the twist. But you certainly, I think in a general sense, if you've got 10 episodes, if you haven't given me juice by 5, that's a bad
not
choice.
Going anywhere, and you know what? This isn't going to be the last time we talk about Reboot the Guardian Code on this show. I am certain. So maybe let's move on to the last big event of this April Fool's Day.
And I interestingly, on the same kind of topic of revivals.
Yeah, exactly. Another revival, which also has had no real involvement with its original creators, but had a much different reception. And this one was not hyped for months. This came as a surprise at the last minute. It was actually funny because,
well, I mean, it was and it wasn't. It's like everybody has known that this is coming. What we thought is we'll see this in September. We did not think like, oh shit, they're gonna sneak premiere this, because I mean, while Adult Swim, so we'll just gradually allude to this, while Adult Swim has a habit of sneak premiering things, and in fact the roots of the block are in secret premieres of content they were legally told to show as part of getting it in the first place. We did not expect this, and that's I think that can sometimes help too.
So as their April Fool's joke, Adult Swim in the United States premiered episode 1 of the 3rd season of Fooly Cooly, not the 2nd season. It was the 3rd season. And it was rumored to be happening a few hours earlier that day. It was funny because at the time that it was happening, which was 9 p.m. Pacific, Jarvis was doing a panel at Sakura-Con. It was his awesome anime endings panel. He showed the ending to the original Fooly Cooly right at 9 p.m. So it was cool. We got the word to him that the new show was airing on Adult Swim in the East Coast at that time, and he was able to announce it, and the audience cheered, and it was pretty memorable. And you would think that I would be really fortunate to be in the States at the time and be able to witness it live, but unfortunately the hotel I was staying in only had the Eastern feed of Cartoon Network and Adult Swim. So when I tuned in at midnight, I caught the end of Mind Game, which they played right after Fooly Cooly. And then we got to watch JoJo's and Hunter x Hunter in Japanese with English subtitles, because that was their gag for the whole night, was that not only were they gonna show that content with no announcement, they also played them in Japanese with English subtitles, and it's the first time that Adult Swim has ever actually done that with any content.
And then did all of their bumps also in Japanese.
And have we ever identified who was doing Tom's Japanese voice?
I think somebody mentioned that on Twitter. Like, I think, I want to say Jason DeMarco said, but I do not recall what he said. So, look it up. That's homework for everybody listening to the podcast.
So, yeah, I didn't get to see Fooly Cooly live. I did catch it eventually, of course. And it was very good, and everyone seems to agree with me on that.
Well, it's been interesting. Like, there were a few people online who are like, it seems like it's, like they could not get past, like, that it had the choice of setting, and not realizing it's like, you do realize that, yes, it's kind of like it's not about a young boy. It's about a group of slightly older, but still, very interestingly, they're all 17, so that means they're all the same age as Samajima and Mimi, so they're all like high school girls. And you think, and it is the Fooly Coolyization of a slice of life, K-on-y kind of show, and I realized that, like, that's actually genius.
What I found interesting is that it did not emulate the original Fooly Cooly in ways that you would expect or were really obvious.
No, it did it in all these other way. I think it's interesting because I think people are going to we're going to get these 2 new series, and they're going to actually add valuable context about what the original series was about besides being a coming of age story, and you realizing that there's a deeper thread that was in the original show that they've realized actually that's the thread you can expand on besides the obvious like intergalactic conflict stuff. There's the much more tangible thing of small town sort of like large town to medium city Japan that was very much, when I, go back to it, especially having visited Japan now a couple of times, and particularly smaller areas like Gifu and Takayama and Nara, that are not these like hypermassive cities, that are these places that are captured in the original Fully Cooley and certainly seem to be captured in Fully Cooley Alternative, the third series, and realizing it's like, it's a love letter to something that's not, that they know is not going to stay there forever. And that ties in really well with the rest of the coming of age stuff, that these ideas, it's like you have both a macrocosm size of this, and then you have the microcosm of that in the characters. And that these things interrelate in a way more interesting way than was necessarily, the focus, or put it this way, it was one of many things in the original Fully Cooley that you can then actually say, like, any series, you can take any of these, I guess you'd say, genres or concepts that are common in anime, whether that's the young boy coming of age with mechs, whether that's, the slice of life, Iyashike, all girls cast series, and we'll sort of see exactly what they're going to be running with Fully Cooley Progressive, though the feedback from the, premiere at the Chicago Comic-Con was incredibly positive for that. And what I get this distinct feeling for, and wrote a great big essay that will eventually, hopefully, fingers crossed, be up on Toon Zone about, and this should say a lot. Like, I haven't written an essay for them, in probably at least 3 years, probably like 4 or 5, like probably half a decade. And there was immediately so much meat in this singular episode that tied into like how Fully Cooley, like into the original show in really refined ways, really smart ways, and ways that show that, like, yes, this is a different set of creatives, but they get this at a level that, clearly some of the audience didn't, but clearly some of the audience did. And they made it work. They made it work, incredibly well. While being, like I said, this love letter to this kind of Japan that's changing. Like, I mean, the fact that the giant iron, so this, this thing that was, of industry, is replaced with basically, a giant, Jusco, or I guess Jusco was bought out by, not Marui, but one of the other big Japanese department store chains. And the thing is, you do actually see, like, the building that they show there is kind of a joke or kind of hyper exaggerated. You do see those, and it is this really grotesque kind of contrast between, like, here's this town that's had its lovely little shopping district since the 1950s, and then here's this massive, soulless glass and concrete thing, that's just sucking the life out of the city. And you're like, oh, that's clever. Like, that's the iron. Like, it fits, so it locks in just the same way and tonally. And the fact that they set that up effectively just by saying, like, that's a cultural implication. Like, you have to kind of get that and maybe have seen it. Fully Cooley is about what you gain and what you lose in adolescence, and how you choose to transition from adolescence to adulthood, and what adolescence actually is and what adulthood actually is. These are big themes in Fully Cooley, and they do all sorts of little metaphors here and there. Like, when you try and act mature and you're still a kid, that's extra childish. When you're a kid and you actually embrace your childhood, that's actually more mature. And that's a big part of the original Fully Cooley. Here, the lead character is clearly immature and emotionally stunted when she's just like, there's one thing to be nowadays age and be like, I wish there was a magical wizard. You'd be like, that's exactly what you should expect at 12. It's a whole other thing to be like 17 and be like, I wish a magical cat would bring me a wand. It's like, you can't be dreaming about being Sailor Moon at 17 necessarily. You got to figure out a bit more of a lane, because there's this explicit rebuke in the original Fully Cooley of that extended adolescence in, the Eyebrows character and Amuro. Yeah. Like, he's hyper childish, even as an adult, and that's to his disadvantage. So there's like, they've already set up with, the new characters some great interplays, and there's a whole lot of, like, rapid fire visual there that doesn't even register. Like there's just the fact that they show for a split second what basically each person's lunch is. And that's immediately reinforcing things you've just learned about their character and the previous two scenes at the lockers and in the classroom. Like that's absolutely fully cool storytelling. And it's the kind of thing that at best would then become overdrawn out in another show. I think in another show you'd want to, like, if you had like 12 or worse 24 episodes, you'd be like, I'm going to gradually introduce each of these this clique. Instead, all of that energy is brought together in the first 4 minutes of the show. In the first 4 minutes of the show, you've already learned an incredible amount about these people, and they're very three-dimensional, especially for the Iyashikei genre. Like I said, these characters are very quickly developed and very fully developed for Iyashikei characters within the first 4 minutes, let alone the first episode. So right there, that's a very fully Kuli thing to say, like, hey, you know that genre that takes X and kind of doesn't necessarily say a lot? We're going to take that genre and are going to compress it to 6. And by the end of the first episode, we may have gotten more done than its 13 and certainly its 26 episode equivalent. So it feels like structurally, it's embracing what Fully Kuli does, and message-wise embraces what it does, and even stylistically, even though it's softer and feels a bit more like KyoAni look, there's still things there's still some storyboarding choices that are like very Fully Kuli-esque. Like the second you have that scene where they keep doing cuts that are gradually cutting out of the picture, the person's trying to explain the rocket, and then she bursts through all of the cuts. That is a Iyashikei acceptable version of the manga.
Did you find that the general atmosphere of the series was more in line with the Adult Swim aesthetic? Not so much the aesthetic of their shows, but the just aesthetic of the block that they try to set through like their bumpers and stuff.
I think it's not necessarily that it's intentionally in that. I think that if part of what you're leaning into is a more slice of life feel than a more manic feel, it's going to fit with the kind of chill, cool flavor of the Adult Swim block naturally. I don't think that's an intentional thing. I think it's an outgrowth of the genre they've picked to use as a basis for this episode or for this series of Fully Kuli. If what you're going to do, and that's interesting because I wouldn't have thought that necessarily about Iyashikei work, but it actually makes sense. Like it makes sense that like, we kind of have these people in like a cool little small town and they're just kind of effing around. I'm like, actually, that's a natural fit to Adult Swim. I don't think that's a constant. It's like, we need to make this more like an Adult Swim thing. Because I think if they were, they would not have, like it's such, and I will say this, it's like, it should not be a gutsy choice to have like 4 high school girls as the leads in your Adult Swim sequel series, but that's actually it's a very conscious choice that goes against the grain of anything else that runs on Adult Swim with any sort of regularity. And I think also Adult Swim's aesthetic has been in no small way informed by work like Fully Kuli. I think like that there's a huge, that has been a definitive, that and like Cowboy Bebop are definitive linchpins in that block. They will rerun those things forever. Like even if they never made more Fully Kuli, they would rerun that once a year until time stopped because it will always be relevant. There's nothing about that will ever necessarily read as dated. I mean, if anything, like the tough part is like, it's when you're showing a newer show, I got to show them with like some cell phones and shit in it, and like that will probably age it a little. Yeah, I guess my final thoughts on that. I am really looking forward to the rest of the new seasons of Fully Kuli. I'm going to be very curious to see what Fully Kuli Progressive is doing because I really don't have any worries about Alternative at this point. I realize what they're probably going to do. I kind of got a sense of where it's going to go, and I have no worries about that staff, that they have proven themselves easily. And like I said, it's more honestly with Progressive at this point, considering it's already getting good online buzz. I really just want to see it. I'm not actually worried about it. And like I said, I think the interesting thing is I would have never figured, I didn't see the through line that would let them make infinite Fully Kuli before, but just from one episode of Alternative, I'm like, they could every 10, 20 years or how often they can get the right people together, take bring Haruko into another person's life that's another kind of story and bring that story together with the overarching space opera type stuff and robots popping out of heads type stuff and bring that into 6 episodes and they still rock. And you could have the Pillows, as long as the Pillows are still making new music. I guess at a certain point, if you can't run out of Pillows music, just start licensing Pavement, because it's the same. It's what they do. The Pillows are just Japanese Pavement. And I love the Pillows, but like, let's be real. No, it's really interesting. I really didn't realize that like that was possible with Fully Cooley. So I mean, the fact that IG's pulled it off, and that Jason DeMarco and Mike Lazo had the guts to offer that latitude for them to find that, and the budget for them to find that is amazing. I think they've got hits on their hands, and I think that I think the main thing is this, though. It's going to be a huge high watermark in anime, probably, both of them. And the rest of the stuff this year is just going to like, well, it's good, but, Fully Cooley did it in 6.
Let's hope that people outside of the U.S. don't have to wait till the home video release comes out to be able to watch it. They haven't announced anything yet.
Yeah,
I don't think they've even announced how people in Japan are going to be able to act.
I think there's Japanese release dates for physical. Because I recall that the Japanese trailer the Japanese trailer makes it sound like both of them are going to debut in September, which I think kind of sucks for them, because it means that we're getting, I mean, clearly it's done, because we have subtitled copies. There's a subtitled, like, this is clearly ready to go in Japanese. Like, that could probably be out in disc now. So it must really speak to like funding, that like Adult Swim can say like, we get to sit on it for us. We get the world premiere. But let that be like, then premiere it throughout the world. I want access to this. Like I would, like if it was some sort of premium kind of access, I would do it. Instead I will probably, use like VPN and my parents' cable or something like that.
Yeah.
Cable logins. I will support it as legally as I can.
I don't trust Adult Swim to make this accessible outside of the United States at all. Honestly,
yeah,
if they have complete control. So
yeah, I do really worry that this is going to. I mean, put it this way, I'd say it would like hold it back, but it's Fully Cooley. It's just like I hope they're not dumb enough to leave money on the table, because that's what it is. It's not going to impede its success. People will watch it outside of the United States come hell or high water. It is the long anticipated sequel to something that people probably didn't even think a sequel was possible to. That's, how rare is this in anime? And in any sort of medium. This shit's like the Tron, legacy of, anime. It's like, we'll never see more of that. And then you do. And everybody, the people who have been waiting for it are thirsty for it. So they can either make some ad money on that, or streaming money or something. Or they can make sure that physicals are rapidly released and reasonable. Look, let's hope it's not.
Are people still thirsty for Tron? I didn't think anyone was thirsty for Tron anymore.
When that sequel came out, that was like, whoa, Daft Punk, like, I think that's the interesting thing is like I said, we've noticed a lot of revivals and reboots of Reboot that suck. Like they just don't really hit the note. And I can't, like, I think anybody who's like saying that Fully Cooley Alternative isn't hitting the right notes, I'm like, you didn't get Fully Cooley then in the first place. Frankly. Like if you're just hyper focused on that the cast kind of resembles K-On!, which I actually think in a lot of ways they break with in very important ways, again, within 4 minutes. Just having a girl who's like not like a ready to be an anime figurine, having a girl who's a bit heavyset but who's also clearly the like most on the ball and smartest of the group. That's so unlike any like flat slice of life show that you should be keying into like that this is something more than cute girls doing cute things. And if you're not, watch the original show again. Watch this show front to back. Think about it. And I do hope people like that's what Fully Cooley is there for. It's like it's a fun ride. But if you're just like it's random monkey cheese, I'm like, you're an idiot. You did not get. It's deeper than that. Suramaki put more work into it, and clearly these new people have tried to honor that in a real way.
All right. Well, I think it's time to wrap up. So, Karl, thanks for coming on. Where can people find you on social media?
I'm at Karl R. Olson, KarlRolson on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. You can also check out my music at Ultraklystron.com. That's a hard thing to spell, so really just follow me on Twitter.
It'll be in the description of this podcast episode, as it always is, because of course, Ultraklystron is behind the theme song for this show. You can find it on his album Packet Flood, and of course you can find that at ultraklystron.com. So thanks for tuning into Zonan Canada. You can reach me on Twitter at jbetteridge or email zonancanada@gmail.com. Please subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play Music, or your podcast app of choice, and leave a rating or review if you have a chance. That'd be really great. If you know anyone who might like this show, please recommend it to them, and see you again.
Later.